everyone, and welcome to today's weekly webinar, where we explore careers, research topics, and all the things that matter to you. My name is Adam Smith. I'm the Program Director for Dementia Researcher, and I'm delighted to be your host for this session. And today we're discussing a topic that's both exciting and at times daunting: the transition from researcher to research leader. It's a shift that many aspire to, yet it comes with challenges that aren't always openly discussed. Moving from being a mentee working under guidance to becoming an independent researcher with your own vision, team, and funding is a pivotal step in an academic career. But how do you navigate this transition effectively? We're fortunate to have two wonderful speakers with us today who are both hiding at the moment. Ian and Davide, you can join me now. And they've both, the reason why they're wonderful speakers is because they've both made that leap and will be sharing their insights, experience, and advice with you today. Dr. Ian Harrison is a senior research fellow at University College London and recent award winner at last week's Alzheimer's Research UK conference. Congratulations, Ian. Was that Early Career Investigator of the Year award?
Yep, David Haig Award.
The David Haig Award. Congratulations, Ian. So who better to give advice? During the pandemic, he took a bold step of establishing his own lab, focusing on the glymphatic system in the brain. And we've actually had Ian talk about this before, so go look back through some of our archives. With fellowship funding from two charities, he's forged a path to independence and brings invaluable experience on funding, leadership, and lab management. And Ian was a part of a podcast we did a while ago about how you set up a lab for the first time, and it's full of brilliant nuggets of advice. I think there was also Dame Bacano in there and Claire Durant and others. So if after this, stay around and watch and then go listen to that podcast. Davide Bruno is a reader in psychology at Liverpool John Moores University, whose research focuses on memory, aging, and dementia. And he's built a remarkable career in what is probably one of the most competitive fields, publishing extensively and establishing him as a leader, an institution that's really doing wonderful work in that area. Hi, Davide. Thank you very much for joining us. Both of our speakers are going to share their journeys and practical tips for those looking to follow in their footsteps. As all of you know by now, those of you that have joined us before, we start with a 30 to 40 minute live stream where each of our two speakers are going to present for 10 minutes. Then I've got a bunch of questions. Hopefully you'll ask some questions too. And then we may join you in the chat if there's an appetite for doing that, or we'll keep the conversation going and we'll be here for about an hour. And Davide, I think you kindly volunteered to go first.
Yeah.
So would you like to test sharing your screen, or share your screen now, and I'll hand over to you.
I shall do that. Is everything looking okay?
It is. That's perfect. Thank you.
All right. Well, thanks so much for having me here, Adam, and the whole Dementia Researcher community. Really a pleasure to be doing this. I'm going to start, obviously, as introduced. My name is Davide. I am a reader in psychology at John Moores University. I'm going to be obviously putting a lot of caveats into this presentation because I'll be discussing it from my own experience, which may not exactly apply to everyone else's. And I'm sure Ian will have a different experience as well. And one of the reasons I'm stating the obvious, each path is different. So you shouldn't feel like you have to do exactly as someone else has done, but you can obviously take inspiration, or you can learn from experience by observing other people. And hopefully this is something that we are giving to you today. But so for example, to start, I come from Italy. I'm Italian. I grew up in Italy. I studied in Italy. My first degree was in psychology, which is probably different from a few other people in the community. Specifically, I studied experimental psychology, which is something that only about 3 out of 700 of my colleagues actually studied in that course. And I was at the University of Parma. After that, I wanted to pursue a PhD. Obviously, I'm interested in research. That's what I'm doing for a living. So I wanted to do a PhD, and I had some challenges finding one in Italy, as fellow Italians can testify, it can be difficult at times. And I found an opportunity at Keele University in the UK, which is why I came to the UK the first time. And that was a PhD in cognitive psychology. So again, my background may be different from many of the people that are part of the community. I did not start with dementia. Dementia was something that came later. I started with memory. So memory is the original area of expertise. Then I went on to do a series of seemingly endless postdocs, University of Southampton, University of Massachusetts, Amherst, Nathan Klein Institute in the US, which is a research center near New York City. And I was also part of New York University at that time. And that's where I actually started with dementia-related research. And I was hired for that post because I had experience with memory. So you can see the connection there: memory, Alzheimer's disease, dementia, and so on. Eventually, I wanted to come back closer to home, to Italy, and I moved to Liverpool, where I am at the moment, and I am at Liverpool John Moores University. So obviously, me, PhD student, picturing what it's going to be like when I get a job where I am independent. In my case, it would have probably been looking at a lectureship or an assistant professorship, where I am part of a university, not specifically just a research center, but universities. So how do I picture it? I picture myself, this beautiful office overlooking something nice, feet on my desk. I can do whatever I want now, and just pick an article and pick a book and think about whatever I want to do. That was kind of like the idea, exciting, a bit scary. When I got there, actually, it obviously wasn't quite the same. First of all, couldn't see much out of my window. And second of all, I felt a bit lost. Particularly because my background was and is still mixed. So I had sort of many strands. I came from psychology, cognitive psychology, experimental psychology, but then I was working with dementia. I was doing a lot of neurobiology, a lot of research in genetics. I mean, not personally because I couldn't do that, but I was working with people doing that type of research. I became so multidisciplinary that at some point I didn't even know what I was doing. And going to conferences like AAIC, people would say, "Oh, you're a neuropsychologist." Oh, interesting. I never knew I was a neuropsychologist. I never thought of myself as a neuropsychologist. So again, I got lost a little bit, to the point that I remember there was a ref advisor who looked at my submissions for ref and said, like, who exactly is Dr. Bruno? Because his papers are all over the place. And that wasn't considered a terribly good thing, to be honest. It's kind of like, that's not good. He needs to be more focused. So for a long time, when I became independent, I was lost. I was trying to find my own voice, didn't really know how to find it. So a few considerations as to how you might be able to find your voice if you found yourself in a situation anywhere similar to mine. So first of all, you probably will have to prioritize. If you get a job like a lectureship, as I did, you're going to have other responsibilities. You're going to have to be teaching. You're going to have admin responsibilities. If yours is a fully research job, then that side may be less heavy, but you still probably have more responsibilities because you're also managing the team. So you're going to need to prioritize, also delegate to some extent. When you get to that level, how do you choose to prioritize? How do you choose what to prioritize? You can base it on your skills. I'm good at this, not so good at this, so maybe I should do what I'm good at. Good, that's a good start. But also, if what you're good at is something you hate, that may not be such a great start. So you also need to consider whatever you like doing. You may have important values that you want to uphold. So for instance, I don't know, you want to make the world a better place, okay? So in that case, you want to focus on something that will actually pay off, have impact in the world, and so on. Then many of us would probably have to cave to opportunity and convenience, in the sense that, say that I want to do research with fMRI, but I don't have any access to an fMRI. That makes it very difficult for me to carry out my research. I'll need a lot of money, I'll need contacts, I'll need access to something I don't have access to at the moment. So opportunity and convenience. And by the way, I don't want to do research with fMRI before anybody asks. Then you may also want to get funded. Getting funding as fun is great, because then you can do a lot more things, but not everything gets funded. It's obviously very competitive, and you may have to be smart as to what type of topic you choose to study, because that is something that may get funded as opposed to something more esoteric, which may be brilliant and maybe will get funded in 10 years, but not today. And then another consideration is, what type of feedback am I getting from my peers? If everybody thinks what you're doing makes no sense, again, it may be brilliant in 10 years, but it can be a problem right now. So from this perspective, a few tips. Once you advance into a position of independence, obviously, you don't need to burn bridges with your past. Maintain the old connections. You probably want to form new ones. If you're like me, socially inept and awkward, it's difficult, but networking is an art, something that you can learn to do. I personally send way too many emails to people I don't know. They probably think I'm insane. Some of them might think, well, I've got something interesting to say. So you never know. You will have to learn to manage your time with increased workload and responsibilities. That's sort of like prioritizing, delegating, I mentioned before, but that also means you need to do some self-care, because you'll have more pressure on you. You need to be able to maintain your physical and mental health while you're doing that, which can also always be a challenge in this field. It's very competitive, it's very stressful, and so on. Remember, we're all frauds. Every single one of us is a fraud. We've always thought we were a fraud. We probably are all frauds. So don't worry about that, because we are all frauds. So you need to believe in what you're doing, despite the fact that you are a fraud. And you will fail. You will fail many times. So that's something to keep into consideration. There will probably be more failure than successes, and that's okay. That's part of the process. Just keep your head up and keep going. Staying active is a good idea. So keep doing something. Obviously, you need some time to think, but at the same time, keep having something going in the background can be a good way to feel like you have momentum and you keep going. And then obviously, we are scientists, we need to keep an open mind, but sometimes if we constantly change topic of interest and switch from something to another, we end up with nothing. So we do need to balance keeping an open mind with chasing every butterfly that passes by, because that would lead to complete inability to doing anything. And that's it. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Davide. I had a question that came in, which was, obviously you talked there about how you'd kind of try to focus in more. Have you had to adapt your research focus or priorities to secure funding or to align with institutional goals more? Has that influenced where you focus?
I wouldn't say institutional goals. Institutional goals tend to be, in my experience, so vague that could be anything. That actually, the main thing that your employers want are that you publish things and you get funding. So institutional goals isn't so much a concern for me. But yes, definitely, I had to change somewhat radically my way of doing research, in the sense that, again, my background is in experimental psychology. So it's carrying out a series of lab experiments and focusing on little details, whereas a lot of what I see getting funded is way more broad, has much more large-scale implications. So I had to look much bigger. As a matter of fact, now I do actually do pretty much zero lab work, and I work essentially with databases. So it's having the opportunity to get a lot of data with very limited resources. When I started, I had no resources. I still have no resources. You have to look for everything, basically. So having zero resources to start with, and trying to get as much bang for your buck as you can, you may have to readjust what you're doing and look in different directions.
And sorry for putting you on the spot about this, but one of the things that I remember talking to particularly new fellows was how there was this expectation that as soon as you had your fellowship, that was it, you were okay for funding. But increasingly, I've kind of come back and heard more that absolutely not. The minute you get your fellowship, you need to keep looking for more funding, because whilst your salary might be covered, you've got to actually have some money to do things then. So how many funders do you have right now? How many different grant pots do you have to draw into to keep that going?
So I never received a fellowship per se. So I'm paid by the university because I'm a reader, right? I have one pot of funding that allows me to hire people so that I can actually do research. But yeah, so at the moment our grant expires next year, and I have either applied for or I am applying for 4 grants right now. So yeah, obviously you keep going because you run out of money, and somehow, okay, we get greedy perhaps, but the money is never enough, because I have a postdoc who is horribly underpaid, and it's not fair. We need to, there's so much work that we can do, we need to do, and so we need more money, and we keep trying. That's how it goes.
And how do you, I don't know, I guess, Ian, feel free to jump in on this as well. We'll come to your talk in a moment. How do you bear the burden of that? Because, of course, whilst the idea of moving into leadership is the aspiration of many researchers, the extra burden then of knowing that there are people who are dependent upon you for their jobs. And I've spoken to quite a few postdocs. When you say to them, oh, what are you doing next? And the answer is all too often is, it kind of depends if my boss gets the next grant. Yeah. How do you prepare yourself for that?
I didn't. You just in academia, in my experience, you're not prepared for anything. You just go in and you do it, and you learn on the job. Work in a university, again, in my experience, nobody tells you what to do, and you sort of ask around, and you sort of try to figure it out. So in this case, again, if I were a postdoc or to a postdoc, my advice would be, obviously, you need to be loyal to yourself. Find a job anywhere. Don't wait for your boss to get funding, because that you can't control, or at least have options lined up. That's also what I tell my postdoc: please find a job. Take the responsibility off of me. But at the same time, yeah, she's wonderful, and I would hire 1,000,000 times over. And I do feel the responsibility, but at the same time, I'm doing what I'm supposed to do. So focus on your process of getting funding, doing everything correctly. Then the rest you can't control. So.
And I think it's important that, if you're watching this now and you are one of those postdocs who's kind of dependent upon the PI getting funding, I know often I've had these messages back saying that people feel guilty, and you go, but you absolutely can't do that. And I think any PI will be the first to admit, no, that you bear no responsibility, no ill will at all. If you haven't got secured funding for any length of time and you need that, then you should go find that. Ian, shall we hear from you now, and then we'll have more questions afterwards?
Yeah, sure. Let me share my screen. Cool. Right. Hopefully you can see that.
We can. Thanks you.
So thanks very much, Adam, for inviting me to do this. So today I'm just going to talk to you about my transition to independence, really, and how I've kind of found things over the last few years, having kind of made this initial jump, as we heard from Davide. So I thought I'd just start by just kind of giving you a brief overview of my career up until that point. So I started my undergraduate degree in pharmacology at the University of Southampton. At the end of my degree, I applied for PhD projects, didn't get any, and so kind of went back to the drawing board, and I was like, right, well, I'll move home, and then I'll do a master's to keep me in science for the next year. So that's what I did. So I moved back home to London and did an MRes in experimental neuroscience, which is good because I got experience of lots of different research groups during the kind of rotations that were associated with that year. I then applied for PhDs again, and thankfully this time got onto one. It was a 1+3 year PhD. So the first year was another MRes, this time in experimental physiology and drug discovery with bioimaging, and that led on to my PhD, which is at Imperial in neuropharmacology. So looking at the neuroprotective effects of a class of drugs in a rodent model of Parkinson's disease. And because I kind of had experience of bioimaging in my MRes, I was using MRI, preclinical MRI, to assess pathology in those animals' brains. So after this, I was in a similar position like we talked about. I was kind of holding off and waiting because my boss applied for some funding which would have kept me on for another 3 years as a postdoc. That didn't happen. We didn't get the money. So I applied for a job and found a project at UCL, this time looking at neuroimaging, but in mouse models of Alzheimer's disease. So I came into the lab it was a relatively short contract. I think it was 14 or 15 months, but I've kind of been at UCL ever since, really. But during this time, when I started as a postdoc, this paper was published, which was the kind of initial description of the glymphatic system, and it was kind of immediately, it was kind of controversial. There was lots and lots of kind of buzz in the field about this new pathway that had just been discovered. And we were working on a mouse model of tau pathology at the time. So it had been shown that amyloid, one of the proteins that builds up in Alzheimer's, is involved in this pathway. Because we had a model of tau pathology, we thought, well, let's do this complicated imaging technique because we know about imaging. I was working in an imaging lab. I was like, let's do this imaging technique on our mice in tauopathy. And it went really well. We published this paper off the back of my postdoc project, showing that this system was impaired in a mouse model of tauopathy. So I postdoced. I went from kind of grant to grant for about 5 years at CABI, and it's at this point where we published this paper that I kind of realized that I wanted to take some of this data a bit further and in a direction where my boss wasn't really interested in taking the project, kind of building on my kind of background in pharmacology and kind of experimental molecular and cellular biology to kind of probe the system and figure out how this pathway works in the brain. So it's then that I wrote up my fellowship application idea. So I applied to Alzheimer's Research UK to look at the involvement of this system in tau pathology, and I submitted that in February 2019. And I was really, really proud of this application. It took me a really long time to write. I really believed in the experiments. I thought, we really need to do these experiments for the sake of the field. I was really passionate about it. And at the same time, Parkinson's UK were also advertising their research fellowship fund, and the deadline was just a month later. And I was like, well, I've got a background in Parkinson's disease. There's no reason why this kind of science can't be applied to Parkinson's disease. Parkinson's is often less researched than Alzheimer's disease, but there's no reason why this pathology shouldn't be investigated with this mechanism. So I also sent an application in for that. So I went through the process, had interviews for both of them, and then it was the summer of that year, 2019. Within a week of one another, I was told that both of these projects were accepted for funding, which which left me at a really a terrifying time. I was like, well, what do I do? Do I stay in Alzheimer's research, because that's what my postdoc has been in, or do I go back to Parkinson's research, even though it's a smaller field, and I haven't been in that field for 5 years or so. So I spent a long time making pros and cons lists over this period. But then I came up with this idea that there's no reason why I couldn't take both of these projects simultaneously. So I picked up the phone and I spoke to the research directors of both of these charities, and I suggested that I could work on both of these fellowships at the same time, and I could then recruit a postdoc to work on both of the fellowships with me, which to my surprise they accepted. And so I was pretty much in at the deep end. This is the kind of example of the sort of pros and cons list I was writing. One of the good things about having both of these fellowships was I got to do both projects. I really believed in the science in both of these projects. I really wanted to do the experiments. But this did mean that I had double the amount of kind of the non-research work to do on the side. It would mean that I could start establishing my group pretty much from the start, but equally that meant that I'd be in at the deep end. So from day one of the project, I would have a postdoc that I'd suddenly have to manage. I'd never really managed anyone before, apart from kind of supervising students in the lab. But because the projects were so related, it did come with a kind of level of economy of scale. So there's some parts of each project that were kind of similar. So I was able to save time and resources. So I came to the conclusion that it's probably a good idea to take on both. But quickly realized that this is, I've got 2 young daughters at home, and so I often communicate in Disney memes. But as you can see, this is kind of my expectation of what leading a group was going to be like. But in reality, it was a lot of work, a lot of work. And I quickly found out that there's always, once you're in a position of leading a research group, there's always something else that needs doing, or something that draws your focus away from the research. So I was trying to do these experiments with the postdoc in the lab on the day-to-day, but there was so much other stuff that needed to happen, and I was the one responsible for it now. Stuff like managing mouse colonies. We kind of established 3 different colonies in the lab, sorting out finances, managing grants, figuring out where the money needs to be and where. HR issues, so recruiting and kind of appraisals, that kind of thing, all the home office and health and safety stuff as well. There's also all the scientific engagement. I was working on 2 different projects, and producing data in both Alzheimer's and Parkinson's disease fields, which made ADPD very, very busy for multiple years. And I wanted to continue kind of the outreach stuff that I was doing as a postdoc. So I was involved in lots of school visits, Cheltenham Science Festival, and doing different demonstrations. I wanted to keep maintaining my profile to make sure that my name was getting out there. So continuing with kind of media interviews and podcasts and things like this, and responded to funder requests, because I was funded by these 2 charities now. They both kind of asked my opinion on news pieces, for example, and because they were paying half my wages, I kind of had to keep up with that demand. There's also internal stuff like university citizenship. So even though I was on a research contract, there still is an expectation to do some teaching, as well as student supervision, and also internal, as you kind of go up the managerial scale, there's kind of internal senior management team meetings and departmental meetings, and all the other stuff that you should be doing as a researcher within the field. So peer reviewing papers, you're on conference organizing committees, and mentoring to kind of bring people with you as you move up the salary scale. But thankfully, I think having both of these fellowships has kind of really established my group and our research niche. We've established different mouse models, which has opened up lots and lots of doors in terms of collaboration and these different tool compounds that we can up or down regulate lymphatic function. So this led on to one of the fellowships being extended, and this has kind of given me the kind of headspace, I guess, to kind of look elsewhere, start applying for other different pots of money for different research projects that we can kind of get involved in, that aren't just focused on that kind of initial core work that I've been based on. And so hopefully I've kind of carved out this niche for our lab group at UCL, which hasn't come without its difficulties. So we're continuing this, thankfully, with some Alzheimer's Society fellowship, which is going to start in September. But again, it highlights how you never can stop. You're always constantly applying for funding, especially if you're on a research contract such as mine. You constantly have to pay your own wages. So just some take-home messages. I'd say that timing is everything for this transition to independence. I kind of chose a time where we just published a relatively high impact paper, and the timing of the research questions were quite good. When I think about writing grants now, I take way longer, I plan way longer to do things. It's only when you kind of plan an experiment of how long it would take you to do it as a senior postdoc, for example, but it takes way longer to do things as a PI who has all these other time commitments and all of these other commitments of your week. Managing a group is always harder than you think it's going to be. Take advantage of training. So most universities offer loads of kind of management and leadership training, and I really took advantage of those quite early on, because I realized quite quickly that I had no idea how to manage a team of people. If you have a mentor, great. If you don't have a mentor, find one and do it now. Having mentors for me was invaluable to kind of help me through this transition to independence, to kind of point out where I was going wrong, where I was going right, and kind of point me in the direction of if I needed help. And also, I'd say about engagement, getting your name out there so that people know you. And this brings me on to my last point, that if you don't ask, you don't get. And ask for help. And if the answer is no, ask why not. And it's always easier to ask for help if you already know people. And that kind of gets to the point of getting your name out there and establishing yourself in the field. So just to go back to this meme, I think I'm hopefully kind of coming out of this initial kind of head down going for the research stage, and I'm kind of starting to see the wood from the trees a bit. And to use a similar meme, I don't think I'm quite ready to go to the ball yet, but I think I'm on my way. Thanks very much.
Oh, Ian. Cinderella. I love your memes. Thank you very much. That was really a really great talk, and really interesting to see that kind of how you progressed through that. I mean, my first question I'd prepared in advance today was there a particular moment or turning point when you realized you were ready for independence? But actually, I think you both touched that quite well. I think, Ian, yours was, because I also have a stat that says apparently it's 8 to 12 years post PhD before people, on average, people find independence. And I think, Ian, you booked the trend slightly there. It was a bit sooner than 8 years.
Yeah.
And you were doing research and realized you wanted to go in a different direction to your boss.
Yeah, because I think we just published this paper, and I had all these ideas of the types of experiments that I wanted to do next, but I was kind of pitching them to my boss, and he was like, "Oh, well, you know," and he'd had ideas of how he was going to take it and what other grants that he had funded, and I was like, "Well, I think we should do these experiments," and it was just a case of, right, I needed to get the money for myself, you know.
Yeah, which makes complete sense. How important do you think it's been? Because as you touched upon, you're really in what is fundamentally a very new field of discovery. How important has it been working in lymphatics in carving out your niche? You know, and then, because of course, if you find I mean, I suppose, is there a risk? I mean, if you go down a niche, that might be something funders aren't interested in, but you've really hit a hot spot where people seem interested in this, and it's been able to attract. How important do you think it is to find a niche?
Yeah, I think yeah, it's important to find a niche, but equally, you can find different ways of doing similar research. Say that you were a postdoc and your boss was taking the research in in one direction. That's, I think, has allowed me to transition independently. So my postdoc supervisor didn't really have a background in Parkinson's research, and that's what I was bringing to it, because we were working on Alzheimer's at the time. But it's when I thought, well, there's no reason why this science can't be applied to that pathology. I know about that pathology. I've published on it because I worked on it as a PhD student. But like you said, I think it's made my route into this a bit easier, because this field has kind of been so quickly developing as I was moving into it. But yeah, it does have its risks, like you say, putting all your eggs in one basket, and if the founding hypothesis is then proven to be wrong.
I'm sure that's not the case, but I get what you mean. I suppose you also need the funders to kind of get behind, to get into that, which is why I suppose there's that balance between, I mean, how much do you feel, either of you feel, that you've compromised along the way in terms of balancing your own interests with what is likely to be funded? Do you think?
I think probably more so now than I did when I first started, because now I've kind of established myself. There's lots of other opportunities for collaboration, and you kind of cook up project ideas with colleagues, and then you're like, well, this isn't really what I want to do. I can see that this is going to be exciting, but this isn't what I want to do. So it's kind of trying to manage that and making sure that you carve out time for you to do to take your research in the direction that you want to take it.
I've got a question. So before both of you were applying for grants in your own right, had your kind of bosses given you the opportunity to be co-PIs on other grants beforehand? I don't know. But what about you, David? No. So you went straight to your own.
Well, co-PI, no. I was given the opportunity to be a co-investigator. But to be honest, I never got any funding until I then became independent.
Likewise,
So,
I was co-I on a couple of grants, and none of them were funded.
Right, because quite often that's what I mean. If you went away and looked for standard advice on that, that'd be a transition point, isn't it? Is you're a postdoc, you're on other people's grants, you build your name, and then you go for your own. So actually, it makes a good point that you don't need to do that. You can apply in your own right from the outset.
Well, the problem, as we said before, is that you're dependent on someone else's grant acquisition, and often you can't do that. So
yeah. And you both also mentioned the importance of mentoring. We've done sessions on mentoring before as well. How do you just have the one? Have you got multiple mentors? I don't know, Ian. How have you got I think
I've got a few.
Did you on Ask Your Mentor podcast? I can't remember.
I was. Yeah, I've got a few in kind of different positions and different kind of sectors, which I think has helped me kind of more immediate. So within my postdoc supervisor, who's kind of continued to mentor me, and people outside of my division or outside of the university, so I can kind of make sure that I'm not in a bubble just within my group at UCL. But yeah, I've got a few.
What about you, Davide?
Yeah, me too. You're never going to go anywhere without someone else giving you advice or helping you. Everyone always depends on others. So that's how it works.
So
everywhere.
This has often come up is don't just rely upon one mentor, is have a little stable of mentors who provide different things to give you advice upon. So somebody in your institution that kind of knows the politics and knows, the institution and how to navigate that. Somebody maybe more on the science or the research side of things, who's an expert who who you can talk to about your research, maybe somebody who you're comfortable talking with a bit about your personal life or the challenges that you're facing day in, day out. And important, of course, to pass that, to pass that on as well, to regift that to others. And of course, our community space has a whole place where you can help find mentors. Because I know we had a couple of questions coming through going, I've just no idea how to go about this, or I'm a bit too shy to ask. I mean, Ian, I'll come to you first on this. Did you formally find a mentor, or were these relationships that just developed? How did you find these people?
No, there was no kind of formal mentorship pairing, so to speak, but it's people that I'd either has collaborated with in the past or kind of worked with people in their group when I was a postdoc, and kind of got on well with them and kind of approached them and said, would you mind just kind of meeting with me every 6 months and just kind of having a check-in and seeing, and they were a lot more organic rather than kind of approaching them and saying, will you mentor me? But that's not to say that doesn't work. That's happened. Loads of people have kind of had that experience and it's worked fantastically well. But it's just, for me, it just kind of happened a bit organically that these people, and like you say, having different mentors for different aspects of your work. So there's somebody that a mentor of mine that I kind of really like the way she runs her research group and her approach to doing science, and that I wanted to kind of keep in touch with her for that versus other people internally or the science itself.
People, I completely agree. People who you find role models, people who you admire, who you kind of aspire to be like. I think they're great people to approach. And I've never seen anybody. It's flat. I mean, sure, it's flattering being approached to say, hey, like that, isn't it? I don't think there should be any nervousness in doing this, because it is it's a flattering thing to be asked. Oh, don't get me wrong, you can put a bit of flattery in there as well about how amazing you are. But, I think don't have that imposter syndrome and be shy to do that. What about you, Davide? Did you have a more formal arrangement, or?
Well, outside of my PhD supervisor and the people I worked with, I didn't have any formal arrangement for mentorship. So it's mostly just meet somebody, you like what they're doing, you ask them questions. And if anybody ever wants to approach me, ask me a question, there's no problem.
Ian and Davide are both available for mentors.
You don't even have to flatter me. That's fine.
Let's. We've got a couple of questions from the audience that I'm going to come to now, and then I've got more that I'm going to try and run through in a bit of more of a quick fire thing. So we had a question here from Jenna asks, any advice on making hiring decisions and forming your research team? Personality, fit within the lab, environment seem important, but it seems so difficult to thoroughly vet the prospect of lab members involved. I can understand that. I saw Amanda Heselgrave, who's been on the podcast a few times today, saying that they'd had 110 applicants for a job that they'd had to go through this morning. Wow. I'm guessing this. I've seen some research assistant, lab assistant jobs in there. I'm guessing it's one of those. But how would you answer this question, Davide? I'll come to you first.
In my experience, you're interviewing people. The people you're interviewing are all qualified. They're all good. But the person that there will be usually one or two people that stand out because they click with you. They say the stuff that you've already thought. Maybe they anticipate lines of research that you want to embark in. And that's my experience. Somebody that maybe they've done their own homework, or maybe you're just like in tune. You're thinking within the same guidelines, within the same stratosphere, whatever. So that's usually what makes it for me.
What about you, Ian? Thanks.
Yeah, likewise. I'd say we had a similar thing when I was appointing that postdoc. That I knew at the beginning when I established my group, I was going to be working with them day to day, So I thought I really needed somebody that I got along with, both personally and kind of scientifically. So one thing I would say is have people on the interview panel that you really trust their opinion, because you could kind of be sold by somebody that comes in and gives an amazing interview, but you kind of need those sanity checks of other scientists or like colleagues, mentors even, that come in on the panel with you, to give you their advice into who they think is the best fit. But yeah, it's a very tricky one, but I think it comes down to a lot of things other than just how well they can do the job, because I think most people that apply for the job, or at least get to the interview, are more than capable of doing the job.
They'll be qualified, won't they?
Yeah.
We actually published a blog just on Friday, I think last week, which Becky Clegg wrote, which says which her title is "How on Earth Do I hire my team?" And Becky's writing for us every month, talking about this transition to independence. And I'm going to read the first couple of sentences from her blog, which was: "One of the most important decisions you'll make when you start your own lab is who to hire. When your lab is small, the first couple of members are critically important, can make the difference between a productive and satisfying early fellowship or a desperately stressful dash to meet objectives." And the problem is most of us in this position have zero experience of having hired anyone before. And the institutional training you get is how not to break the law, but not how to hire good people, which I think is great. Do go away and have a read of that blog, Jenna, as well. I posted a link in the chat. The next question was from Angelina, who asked, "Do you think that the job PI is for good for you, and what aspects of your ECR days do you miss?" I guess this is coming back to some of the points you made, Ian, about I'm guessing you're in the lab a little bit less than you used to be. Although I know actually you're probably in the lab more than many PIs, but you also mentioned hiring and admin and financial management and writing grant applications and HR.
Yeah. I think it's worked out for me. I do a lot of animal experiments, and they're all kind of age timed. So I need to do procedures at a certain time. Like I need to do something when the mouse is X months old, and I think having that in my calendar, like that week I'm doing surgeries. There's nothing that is more important than that in my mind, and I think that has probably helped me prioritize lab work. Saying that, the opposite end of the spectrum, when there's lots of samples that need analyzing, it's easy to push back doing extractions and PCRs and Westerns, because there's a freezer full of samples that I just need to eventually get to, but that's easy to postpone. But yeah.
So, but you're happy.
I'm happy. I think I'm happy now. I think at the beginning it was a lot of stress and a lot of kind of getting used to this new way of working, which I think took me a while to get used to and get up and running with and kind of make my peace with. But I think, yeah.
What about you, Davide? I mean, is there an alternative? I suppose you're a bit different because you've got a permanent position so I suppose it's slightly different situation.
But that's the thing, from my perspective, without PI-ship, there isn't really a career progression. So in a way, you're permanently stuck in contracts, and you need to live contract by contract, and that to me is more stressful than having more responsibility, in the sense that at least I know I've got a job now. I'm not going to get kicked out of the country anytime soon, and so on.
So I suppose it puts you in charge of your own destiny to some extent. And also, as well, as you both say, what's the alternative? Because if you don't progress through the fellowships or progress, what are you going to be on 2-year contracts at a time, just postdocing into your 50s, into your 60s?
Yeah,
Sorry, David.
Sorry, I definitely did not want to do that anymore. And so it's, as I said, it's less stressful to be having more responsibility but having a steady job.
And and even then, I mean, as we've seen, particularly in the UK right now, well, in the US as well for an entirely different purposes. But, you know, the idea that you could find a permanent lectureship as an alternative to climbing the greasy academia pole is less uncertain these days, aren't there? A few of those positions, and they're not necessarily offer the certainty that they once did. But that isn't to say that being a, you know, independence is for everybody. I know quite a few people that were just quite happy to go in and do the lab work, do the research, and then go home at night. I don't know. What does the audience think? What's your opinion on this? I haven't got an option to add a poll. I would if I could, to say, hey, do you want independence? I'm guessing you're all here because you do. Let's treat some of my last questions. So we've got about 5 minutes left. There's a chance to still ask more questions. I'm going to whip through some more of mine as quick fire. So let's go through. How did you develop your leadership style while transitioning from working independence? I mean, what did you do? Just model yourself on other people? Did you make mistakes? Have you always got it right? Ian?
I've never always got it right. I think you're right though, modeling your kind of leadership style on somebody that has either managed or led you in a project before, that you liked, or kind of from the outside, how they kind of model your behaviors, your leadership behaviors on them. But I'd say training as well. Like when I first started, I went on a lot of kind of leadership courses that talked a lot about kind of styles of leadership, and that's something that you never really think about when you're a postdoc just doing science. It's only when you're in that position that you're like, oh, okay, I need to. What type of leader am I? How do I develop? You know?
Yeah. And I was going to say, at what point do you think you need to start thinking about this? So for anybody who's watching, who's going, okay, I want to do this, I'm in a postdoc job at the moment, how far in advance do you start to plan that out? Because I guess, you know, like you said, there's things like you can prepare yourself, you can get those mentors, you can start to work on building your profile, things that are going to make you attractive to funders when you come, networking. Clearly important, because you know those grants that you're applying for independently will look good if they've got other people who've already actually, well, that's a good question. When you went for your research independence, obviously you went for your fellowships, but then the grants you've gone from since, are the other people on there people you'd consider who were more senior than you or been around longer than you?
Yeah,
You still put those on there. What about you, David?
Yeah, similar. So in terms of leadership, I didn't have any formal training. I guess I modeled myself after people that mentored me. And then I quickly realized that it wasn't me. It wasn't my personality, my style. So then I did things completely differently. Failed many times, realized that wasn't the right style either. And then eventually you kind of find a way that works. But then also it will work differently with different people. Different people that you're managing will need different things from you. You'll have a different rapport with different people. So it's always a work in progress, and it's always something you're learning while you're doing to some extent.
Okay, well, we're nearly out of time. Very last chance to ask questions. But what I did was, I'm doing this every time now. I took all the content that we have. So Dementia Researcher as a platform has over 3,000 pages of blogs, podcasts, webinars. We've been going for around 5 years now. So we've accumulated a great deal of content and advice on all kinds of career topics over the years. And I found all the links, put them into a famous AI model and said, please read all of this content and give me what you think would be the 10 top tips. So this isn't just based on whatever it found for itself. This is based on real life content from our website. This is a test now to see if Ian and Davide passed and ticked all the boxes for what our content said. So top tip number 1 was to start early. Begin thinking about independence well before your postdoc ends and position yourself to be able to apply for funding and leadership opportunities. I think you both said that too. Definitely, you tick. Secure multiple funding streams. Don't rely on one funding source. Diversify your applications across various charities, councils, and fellowships. I think you both agreed David has got 4 grant applications in right now to different funders. Ian got his fellowship from 2 different funders and have gone on to have... How many different funders have you got right now, Ian?
3, 4?
3?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Different.
So there you go. Diversify your funding. Number 3, carve out a research niche. Find a balance between continuity with your past work and establishing your unique scientific identity. I think both of you said that too. Number 4 was develop leadership skills. Managing people, budgets, projects is all crucial, and invest your time in leadership training. And also as well, I think another way you can do that is by, if you're a postdoc right now, take opportunities to get involved in those things with your PI right now. So if you went and asked and said, hey, can I get involved in some of the kind of management of the budget and things like that? Honestly, I'd be surprised if they said no, because if getting rid of some of that burden, or if you said, hey, we're hiring a new PhD student, and you said, well, I'd be quite happy to lead on that, you know, write the job description, stuff like that. It's a great way to have a crack at doing that with that umbrella of support. And I can't imagine unless you work for a real control freak who's like, no, or you're crazy busy, but opportunities are there. Find good mentors and peers. Ed, you both said this. Seek advice from those who successfully transitioned. A strong network can make all the difference. Be strategic with publications. We haven't actually talked about publications today, but this said quality matters more than quantity. Aim for impactful papers in respected journals rather than sheer volume. Ooh, that's a tricky one. And I think maybe that's a little bit old-fashioned now, because, of course, these days, Alzheimer's Research UK's current grant asks you for a narrative CV. So I think being able to talk about yourself is probably as equally as important these days as it is papers. Being able to demonstrate how you are delivering improvements within the research culture of where you are, about the talks you've given, how you mentor other people, how you contribute to the greater good, makes a difference. Although whether it still makes as much difference as papers, I don't know.
Well, it's also tricky because sometimes you need evidence for something that you want in order to get funding. And that evidence may not be published in the top journals, perhaps. So you've got some interesting data, you want to get it out because you think that will help your claim for funding, but it may not get published in JAMA or whatever. So, you know, you have to balance it out.
When you get interviewed for your fellowship, I'm guessing not every single question you're going to be asked is about the science or about the research. Some of those are going to be about how you deal with certain situations, how you cope with stress, how you cope with failure. And the more things you've done in your career, the more ways you've contributed gives you more things to talk about. You know, being on organizing committees for conferences, doing peer review, all of these are things that help you demonstrate and make you interesting, I think, is another thing. If you're an interesting person that can talk widely about all kinds of different things, that comes across at interview, I feel. The prioritize well-being. Burnout is real. Set boundaries, manage workload. It's essential for long-term success. Build your profile, speak at conferences, engage with the media, establish yourself as a thought leader in your field. You guys are not say guys, you two are tick, tick, tick on all these things. Don't fear rejection. Grant and paper rejections are part of the process. Learn for the feedback and keep applying. And finally, stay flexible and adaptable. Academia is unpredictable. Be open to justifying and adjusting your path. Whether it's changing research focus, considering alternative leadership roles, different models, keep your finger on the pulse. And there's more, as you've both demonstrated really well, there's more than one way to find independence. Not no two careers are the same increasingly, as you will find if you go back and listen to our Ask Your Mentor podcast that Ian featured on as well. We've got lots in there. I think that's all we've got time for today. I'll give you both a final word. Is there any one top tip for audiences? Tell me a lesson you learned. One thing that you wish you'd known in advance. Who wants to go first?
Nicely. I don't think I can read the summary that you've come up with.
Well, you had the pandemic thing. I remember one from yours was equipment takes 10 times longer than you think it will.
Yeah, definitely. It does. Yeah, and time that it takes to do the experiments takes way longer than you think it's going to.
Give yourself
one
time.
thing I'll say, don't get discouraged, because a lot of your success depends on also luck, and you can't control luck. So just keep going, don't get discouraged. I was talking to a colleague recently, and she was she's probably not giving herself enough credit, but she was saying a lot of my success is based on this lucky thing that happened. And to some extent it's true. Sometimes you're lucky, and you just keep going until you strike luck.
Absolutely. It is based on what you do, but there is a massive amount of luck as well. I mean, the right grant application in the right place at the right time, it can make all the difference. And it is sometimes, no matter what you do, you can make yourself into that best, put yourself in the best possible position, but there is always an element of luck to this as well. Thank you very much, Ian, Davide. You've been incredible guests, as always. I'm really grateful for you both being here. Thank you very much, everybody, for joining us in the salon this week. We're back again next week, where we're going to be talking about how you choose which qualitative research method to apply to your research. So it should be particularly useful for PhD students working in qualitative research areas. Thank you very much, Ian and Davide. You've been brilliant, and we'll see you all again next time in the salon. Take care.